Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi at Device Talks. Welcome back to season 2025 of Device Talks Tuesdays. We've got a great opening day. I feel like we should have had a few weeks of spring training. I'm jumping right into live ball here. Sorry to everyone who was enjoying the music, the pregame music, but we're going to have to interrupt it with a really great conversation with two experts in the surgical robotics field. We've got a far-ranging conversation that will cover what happened in 2024 and what is going to happen or could happen in 2025. We've got, I'll show the experts in a moment. Here we go. Sorry. See, I need my pregame. All right. I got my presentation up here. I'll introduce our guests in just a moment, but I just want to clean up this housekeeping first. Ask your questions through the Q&A box. Don't put them in the attendee chat. If you have some thoughts, if you want to talk about the weather, feel free. I know our producer, Amira, is hit by a freak snowstorm in Central Texas that's crippled the community and it has her kids at home. If you have some weather stories to share, that's a great place to do it, or just want to tell us where you're tuning in from. We'd love to know who's watching and listening. If you have a genuine question that you'd like our experts to answer, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll get to as many as we can. When we don't get to them all, I'll share them with both at the end, and they can do what they like with them and hopefully get you an answer. And of course, if we do have them on the show, I'll read them aloud and we'll put them in the team chat, in the attendee chat, so everyone can see. We've got some cool gifts for you in the resource widget. You can access Steve Bell, who's a surgical robotics expert, his blog there, and you can download some really great data that he's collected on the surgical robotics space. So make sure you check that out. We'll also have some presentations from our other expert, Joe Mullings of the Mullings Group. He will have some slides that we'll be sharing. Those aren't in the widget, but they'll be coming up throughout the discussion, so keep an eye out for those. Joe's got some fantastic data. I know I skipped over a couple of slides and got to the experts, but I just couldn't wait. And once again, use the chat to say hello, and use the emojis. We love to see smiley faces and hearts and thumbs up and all that cool stuff. These are our podcasts. We don't need to get on that right now, but go to devicetalks.com. We got many great podcasts. And we have an upcoming meeting, two of them actually, but the first one coming up is Device Talks Boston. And I hope you'll join us April 30th and May 1st in Boston. Both our guests will be there as well. So if you walk away from this conversation saying, I need more, that's where you can get more. Go to boston.devicetalks.com to register. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Electrocraft, for making this possible. And it's great to have their support of Device Talks. And it's great to have all of your support as well. So I've already kind of introduced them, but we've got two great folks here today. I've had the pleasure of talking with both at various meetings and online. And I walk away with every conversation just having learned a ton more. It feels like a masterclass in surgical robotics. So we have Joe Mullings, the CEO and chairman of the Mullings Group, and Steve Bell, founder of How to Start Up in MedTech. And just a gentleman who's been, we'll get into their bios in a little bit, or at least we'll find out a bit about their background, but they both have been part of MedTech industry for decades, and they've accumulated a great deal of knowledge along the way. So I don't want to take any more time introducing the conversation. Let's get into the conversation. Once again, I already said we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that. So let's do this and let's do that. Joe and Steve, let's first say hello to you. Welcome to the conversation.
Good seeing you, Tom. Thanks for the inclusion on this one, and I'm always excited to talk about the surgical robotics and the healthcare market with yourself and Steve.
Great to have you.
Great to see you. Great to see both of you here, and yeah, thanks very much, and stoked to be on it. And it's great, let's kick off the year with this one. I enjoyed the last one we did and got a lot of great feedback. So really looking forward to stirring it up on this one.
Excellent. And Joe's throwing the heat with his Device Talks backdrop, making me look like the sad little, I don't know. I gotta up my game, Joe. Good golly, you got a better Device Talks backdrop than I do. Look at this.
Your seat's right here.
All right, cool. I'll be coming on down. Before we begin, I do want to let all of our attendees know that you folks helped set a record. This is our biggest Device Talks Tuesday ever. It's 5-6 year existence. So thank you for starting 2025 off helping us start off 2025 so strongly. So, all right, we will get into the conversation. So, highlights of 2024, approval of DaVinci 5. I mean, it was sort of announced, quote unquote, or news broke, and seemed like February, and then a couple of 6 weeks later, they had an approval. So, Steve, let's start off with you, and what you've been tracking this. What impact has DV5 had on the industry?
You know, I was impressed with their launch. I think that they did a textbook launch. What I loved about it was they underpromised, and then by the numbers, they massively over-delivered. I think what it's done is it's set another new standard. It's raised the game yet again. It's brought in more features. I think the biggest impact that it's had in my mind is actually not the technology. It's the fact that they got broad clearances. And that is a barrier to most other companies that, you know, if you go to a hospital and say, I can only deliver 1 or 2 procedures, it's hard to make a commercial decision as a hospital to take it. But you walk in with the DV5 and say, yeah, you can do everything. That makes that decision a little bit easier. So I think that's the biggest thing that came out of that was their broad clearance.
And I think when we were talking in the pregame, I want to make sure I'm getting the numbers right. You had projected maybe they'd sell a couple hundred, and people were kind of giving you heat about that being overly rosy. They ended up selling 362, and I was like, oh, that's one a year. But then I forgot that they started selling in like April or May, so it was a lot faster than that. Joe, it's really taken the market by storm. What's your takeaway from the approval of DV5 and its impact on the market?
I think the approval was a given. I mean, nobody's worked closer to the FDA than the Intuitive organization, and has done a really good job of establishing, you know, baseline and what's best in class. So that's not a surprise. What I think we're going to see, we saw it and Steve mentioned 362 systems in 9 months, beyond what everybody expected. But if you watch what Gary and team are doing and Dave are doing, until 2024, for the most part, Intuitive has been selling against budget in the healthcare environment in hospitals. And you're going to see the unleashing of Intuitive as a competitor now, since we've got these IDEs and clearances that occurred in Q4, which is fabulous for the industry. But now the organization is going to be unleashed to compete on a clinical setting, on a complex, large format robotic system. And so I'm excited if I'm not a large format, complex case surgical robotic, because I'm not going to deal against that team head to head. But if I am Medtronic or J&J, I wish I could reset the clock 15 years and pick a new format to compete in. So I think now we're going to see true competition. If you watch what they've been doing, they are Apple-esque in the way they're approving the market. You look at what they've been putting up. They just had their national meeting. Everybody saw their numbers up on the board. They're just getting started. And what the team has done is they've backstopped their supply chain. They prepped their supply chain to be ready to go. They've brought a lot of this in-house that they haven't before. They've spent a lot of look. It's an organization that's carrying almost $4 billion in cash at the end of Q3, and they deployed a large percentage of that from the year before on setting up for this competitive landscape. So I would not want to be pulled into the deep end of the pool against Ion and against DaVinci 5. So that's where I see it. I think they have just set the bar and said, okay, I've got this. If I'm going to compete in surgical robotics, it's got to be in another category.
All right, great stuff. I know we're going to kind of be recycling back to DV5, and we'll talk about the power of the tower, I'm sure, throughout. So we're going to click ahead to the next one. Joe, you kind of referred to this, the new surgical robotic form factors emerging, the smaller bots. Talk a bit about what, you know, I feel like we're sort of at a surgical robotics 2.0, if not 3.0 sort of stage. Where are we in the robots that are emerging that aren't clones of a DV5?
Yeah, you know, I keep my eye. Look, there's a lot of good systems out there right now, candidly, but I tend to focus on 4 in particular for my own personal choice. I focus on distal motion, I focus on Ascensus, I focus on SSI out of India, and I focus on Moon Surgical, because they all represent an area that is not going to directly head-to-head compete against Intuitive. And this soft tissue surgical robotics, the people who are going to make a difference are going to be bringing robotics into laparoscopy. So that's one category. And I would put like a Moon in there, and I would put a distal motion in there. So they're bringing lap 2.0 and or robotics into lap, and we can talk about that. SSI is a platform company. It was born as a digital surgical robotic company, the only one other than Intuitive. And their product portfolio is beyond just soft tissue, plus they're going into cardiac, and they've got other devices that are coming out of that organization. So I look at them as a standalone digital surgical robotic native company, the only other one out there. And then I look at Ascensus, because Ascensus has got the 10,000 towers on Storts that they can leverage on, and I'm sure we'll get into the power of the tower conversation. Anthony, years ago, had said that performance-guided surgery, not just robotics, is the way to go. So he's got that ISU that is a very unique platform, even acknowledged by Intuitive. And I think the tie-up between Storts, visualization, the tower, Luna 2 coming out, and enough case understanding what's going on, those are the four that I'm watching in the market right now that I think have the ability to get some land grab before Intuitive decides to maybe step into that area in that mid acuity case, mid to low acuity, the highest volume there is. That's where they're all playing.
Excellent. And we'll get into stores in the next item. But Steve, I know you visited Virtual Incision recently. They had that great picture of you welcoming you to the headquarters. You had a great session with Moon Surgical that you had up on LinkedIn. And anyone who's not following Steve or Joe on LinkedIn, you're making a mistake, because they're always posting great content on this topic. And at SRS last year, you opened it up with a presentation where you sort of told people, like, hey, wake up to SS innovations, wake up to what's happening OUS, not only in Europe, but in Asia. Talk a bit about again, to follow up on add some more to what Joe's been sharing in terms of the new types of robots we're seeing, and you're getting to play with these and touch them firsthand. I know you've got a lot of experience in the surgical robotics industry. What's your takeaway from each of these visits that you've had?
Yeah, so I think I agree a lot with what Joe says, which is trying to go head to head and smack Intuitive between the eyes is just futile and silly. So you got to be smart. One of the things was, and Joe's talked about Moon and distal, but I think virtual incision and mirror is just a completely different way of thinking about a robot. Which again, will it be as big as a Da Vinci in terms of sales and stuff? Probably not, right? But are they going to have a successful business going after what they're going after? Yes. Are they going to be able to go to places like ASCs and have every room ready? Because you pull the robot out of a box, sterile, ready to go. Have they got some clever stuff around the way they can do hub and spoke telesurgery? Yes, they've probably got clever ways about that. So what I admire about companies like that is that they are literally thinking in a completely different way, which I think is the smart way to do it. Moon is a completely different way of thinking. It's not a teleoperated sit-down robot like Intuitive. So it's going to find its own space. And I think that robots finding their own space will be a very important theme. Joe mentioned SSI, and I've been really impressed with their focus on cardiac. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more maybe about that, but there are areas as well where Intuitive hasn't focused or not brought their firepower onto it, or their form factor doesn't fit the right way for it, or their offering is not perfect for it, no matter how brilliant the robot is. So again, if you're smart, you're going to nip around the edges. You're going to try and find these areas to go into. I think one of the areas that the form factors that compete with Intuitive are being smart on. So if you look at Tumai with Medbot, or you look at Edge Surgical with their NP1000, or Kangduo even coming out of Harbin SageBot, they're looking at telesurgery as being a differentiator. That's one of the things they're really working on, because today Intuitive they've not got their telesurgery switched on. It's under the hood, I guarantee it, but it's not switched on yet. They've not deployed that at scale yet. But the other companies are having some success, again, by trying to find areas where they have a unique proposition. And I think that all the companies that do that are going to, have a little bit more success by doing that and not have to spend the massive marketing dollars to compete with Intuitive head on.
Let me jump onto something Steve said there. Marco,
yeah, go right ahead.
Could you give me slide 4, Marco? This is a really interesting slide set that hopefully the viewers can see. If not, I'll pop it up there later, and just stay on that slide, Marco. This was a data collected with surgeons to categorize basic typical setting, suturing requirements, and overall complexity of the case. And there's a clear differentiation here between lower and higher acuity procedures. So this was done by Moon Surgical. So if you look at the upper level where Maestro is and the lower level where Da Vinci is, and you look at the case volumes and the procedures, you can see that the requirement for suturing, or let's call it complex surgery, where you would compete head-to-head with Da Vinci and the machine they've got, as Steve said, and we all say, makes no sense. But look at what's happening where you can take LAP 1.0, bring it to LAP 2.0, add an AI and a data in there for surgeon insights and administrative insights in the hospital and or site of care, ASC, outpatient. That's the sweet spot where I think you're going to see the distal motion platforms and the Moon Surgical platforms eat into that. Can a distal motion slide down in complexity? Absolutely, but makes no sense. This is where we're coming back to introducing robotics into LAP 2.0. And I do believe some of the surgeons are going to go in that direction, because from an economics perspective, you can't have a Da Vinci 5 world exclusively. The economics and the geographies make no sense. So this is a really interesting slide on data that makes that very clear. Low mid acuity is the competitive landscape, and where Da Vinci's playing and some of the strategics are looking to go are just getting pulled deeper into the pool.
Joe, so there's something really interesting about that sheet that you've just shown, which is when you look at the top end, if you look at on the lower to mid acuities, if you look at total event time, and I don't mean just the case of actually operating, the operating time. I'm talking about the OR turnover, anesthesia induction, into the OR, out of the OR. The proportion of operating time becomes less versus the overall time when you go to those lower acuity procedures. And you shared with me a little bit of data about how it's also going to be about the efficiency and the turnover that's got to be really, really important in those cases. It's not just about the actual operating.
Correct.
Did you want to pull that? I think you had a slide or something on that.
You bring up 8 through 11 or whatever it was. So Steve hits a spot here. What we haven't really realized is there was a fixation on how agile and effective exclusively the robot was. And having been inside the inner walls of Hugo early days and Ottava early days, the over-indexing towards the gymnastic capabilities of the robot may have got too much of a focus on them. And just as an example, that these organizations that now are going to intelligently attack the full cost of time, labor, and insights administratively, as they have a 2 to 4 minute setup time, whether it's a Moon Surgical or a distal motion. And Marco, just cycle through these. This is data that comes off of the fleet, again, on premise, as you're looking at setting up these ORs. And if you think about ORs, 80% of the hospitals own ASCs. And among those ASCs that hospitals own, nearly half have 5 or more ORs in their ASC. So if you're going to do a mid to low acuity case, the complexity of the surgery becomes less important, and the efficiency on the high volumes become everything. So this is just the kind of data. Give me another cycle on the next slide, if you can, Marco. So OR, administrative data, again, inventory, consumables, time to set up, surgeon preferences, all of this. Think about the pit crew when racing after a while and on Formula One became as important of in the pit, turning the car, getting the fuel on board, getting the tires, getting out, you can apply that sort of workflow to these mid-lower acuity cases that I think are going to be pivotal if they can keep the robot at the right price point, because then it becomes surgery as a service, data as a service, on top of taking lap 1.0 to 2.0.
All right, great stuff. I feel like the coach of an NBA All-Star team. I'm just rolling the ball out and letting you guys play some ball. This is great. We'll hit number 3, and of course we can circle back and revisit a lot of these points. Great slides, Joe. Thanks for bringing those to the conversation as well. We talked about Karl Storz in a sense, the acquisition a bit before. That really, I think, surprised a lot of people. I'm sure it didn't surprise everyone on this call, but it just seemed like a seismic transaction for the surgical robotic space. I think most of us on the outside, myself included, saw it as some sort of validation of surgical robotics, just having an acquisition like this one and having a company move into the space. But then I learned that the broader meaning and the power of the tower. So, Steve, can you talk a bit about, what were the implications of the Storz, the Sensus acquisition? And then Joe, will go to you. But what were some of the things that were maybe less obvious to folks who don't follow the industry as closely? Why was it an important deal?
I think it's an important deal because you've got several companies out there who have imaging towers. And for those that are not familiar, you have a tower on there and you have an image processing, you have an insufflator, you sometimes will put on the same tower also your energy device. So, your electrosurgery or your Bovi or your diathermy. And those towers are, they're a good service line for people because they have cameras and they have scopes and they have service contracts and service contracts and service contracts. And if you talk to hospital administrators, they know there's a lot of money in those service contracts. And the volume of them is quite big as well, of how many are out there. And what happened with DV5 is that, as I've said many times, that they brought out a fully capable tower. So if you've got a Da Vinci 5 in your hospital, their tower can do everything you need to do for laparoscopy. They've got a handheld laparoscopic camera on there. They've got an insufflator. They've got energy. And they're scooping up all that data, by the way, just to let you know, comparing it laparoscopic versus robotic. So you've got a company like Storz, that is a threat to some of your core business. It's also a threat also to the things like the OR1 sort of thing. But on the tower themselves, which is a real bread and butter piece of their business, they risk to not be able to get tower upgrades and new towers going in. And you start doing some of your lap surgery on the robot, and also your robotic systems start eating into towers, because as we've seen, 16 to 18% of procedures come across, a lot of those from laparoscopy to robotic. You don't need as many standalone lap towers. So that whole market was a threat to them. So I think they were smart that what they said is, we need to be in the robotic space. And my understanding is they had a robotic program internally for a long, long time. And I give them huge credit as Storz to say, you know what? Sometimes you're better going off and going and buying something that's either already established, got some clearances, and not wait 2 or 3 or 4 more years, bring something out and have to start from scratch. So I give them huge credit for that. I think that was a super smart thing they did. And they took also a Sensus, which has Senhance, which is their first robot that goes out there. And I have my loves and hates about Senhance as a system. But I think they saw 2 things. I think they saw Luna, which is the next generation, and they thought, okay, that is actually going to be a nice upgrade. And they also had, as Joe mentioned earlier, the intelligent surgical unit. And what they understood is putting all the smarts, the AI, the understanding, the situational awareness, the real-time analytics, and all these things, that you put that not only into the Luna or the Sensus, the Senhance, into the Luna, but you can also bring that in and now bring it into your towers as well. And you start getting this effect across the whole of their business, where the whole business becomes smart. You've got robotic option, laparoscopic option, all tied in with this intelligent surgery. I think it's a smart move that they've done. And, they got it, what I think is a very good price. I won't go into that too much, but I think they got it for, a really good price.
That's
Yeah.
great. And Joe, I know you know it's a census, and yeah, a little more, and maybe talk a bit about the impact on Stryker. I know that we've kind of it's kind of dragged Stryker even deeper into the surgical robotics conversation.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what Stryker does, and I want to come back around to that. So, look, you buy franchises sometimes for the players, as well as the stadium. So, sure, you look at the stadium. Senhance was good, cleared robot, the only other one at that point in time, large format cleared. And then the Luna is all the lessons learned from Senhance and all the other lessons learned from surgery. But what you got there too was Anthony Fernando. And I think Anthony is one of the underappreciated big thinkers in performance-guided surgery. And I won't just say robotic surgery. I think Anthony is disciplined. He understands values, got phenomenal background, and just a wonderful human being, is just like cherry on top. But Anthony pushed them appropriately not to compete head-to-head in a large format exclusively. You take that ISU that comes out of a phenomenal team in Israel. So that brain power in the Israeli AI environment that is second to none in the entire industry, and sorry, Bay Area, is Israel owns that real estate from an expertise, in my opinion. You compound that on a 10,000 tower install base, you've now created a pretty compelling proposition that if you had to scale the intelligent surgical unit, it previously had to be aligned with Luna and trying to put $1 million plus robot out. Now you've just added incredible value to Storz on their visualization platform and created a differentiation with what Stryker has. And you've created an on-ramp potentially to Luna and other products that the Ascensus team has got in the pipeline that they're pushing out. So I just think it really pushes back Stryker in a really disadvantageous situation without a robot, without AI plugged into a tower. And that AI platform has been developed in current technology architecture, not in previous to 2020. You know, you've got NVIDIA on board and you got Google on board, and you can't underclub how important it is on these towers that post 2020 and pre 2020 on their architecture to take advantage of these large learning models, the NVIDIA horsepower, and you can say you've got it on board, but when you start to drill it and get the AI and the data out of that, it's not going to be there. So I think you're going to be able to have the learning of Luna. We'll see how that goes in the market. But at $100 million acquisition cost, that was a no-brainer. And I can't believe, I'm still wondering how J&J did not grab that before Storz did. It's just confounding to me for $100 million.
Sorry I brought that up.
Is more than that.
Sorry I brought that up. I know it gets you upset. I'm gonna put up the next two bullet points right now. We can kind of combine them because I want to move into 2025. I do want to say, normally at the top I say you can watch this on demand. If you know someone who is not watching right now but would enjoy this conversation, yes, they can watch it on demand. Just go to devicetalks.com and they can register. You can watch the whole thing live. We won't be able to handle questions, but you'll get all the great insights that we're getting right now. So sorry I didn't mention that higher. So the next two items were, oops, hold on a second. Boom. So talking about the large strategics, I want to talk about the IDEs, but I think within here we want to talk a little bit about the FDA and their attitude towards surgical robotics, which has been positive. And then within that, maybe we've already talked about SSI innovations. We saw some other great systems at SRS. I'm thinking about Rob Surgical from Spain and some others as well. But we can talk a little more about some of the new companies coming from OUS. But let's talk first about the FDA and about the clinical progress or the regulatory process progress we are seeing, both from Medtronic and J&J. They're both moving forward. But Joe, I know that you've been really impressed with the FDA's look towards surgical robotics. It seems, in your mind, a very cooperative relationship at this point.
I think it's fabulous. They've really focused on creating a clear path, not an easier path, and no outside help, if you will, which would be unreasonable and not fair for patient safety. But they've made it a very clear pathway. If you do this, then you get that, where in previous years it wasn't very clear. And there were some organizations that had to go back and spend an enormous amount of time and money for clinical data relative to the FDA. So I think the FDA has been an absolute asset. I wouldn't call them a friend, but an asset to the industry that shouldn't go underclubbed and under acknowledged. And it's clear. Look at the rush to the door in Q4 of 2024. It was just amazing on how many systems got either IDE, Pursue IDE, whether J&J, whether it's EndoQuest, others. It's a fabulous environment right now.
And Steve, you've been involved in this process before, one way or the other. Does it feel different than it did in the past? Does the FDA's look towards surgical robotics?
Yeah, I think for a period they were a little bit confused, and they seeded a lot of confusion, and people were a little bit not understanding. I think Joe's right. They've not lowered the bar. What they've done is they've made the bar very clear. They've just made it clear of what you need to do, and it's phenomenal to see people getting the IDEs, but also the actual clearances on the devices as well. You know, I was thrilled. You know, I worked with CMR, and I was absolutely thrilled that Vercius got a clearance. I think that's brilliant. I think it's amazing. I was great to see J&J finally get Ottava in the IDE, over the IDE. So, you know, really looking forward to see cases there. It was good to see Medtronic finish their IDE. Now I want to see them get the clearance, and I'd like to see them get the clearance. You know, I've made it very clear. I'm all for competition. I think that this is going to be very boring if it goes back to being a single player again. So, you know, I'm really rooting for everybody to do well in this. And I think the FDA has been the interesting change for me that I saw over the last 2 or 3 years. In the past, it was, you know, and it just happened when the EU did their own goal and switched from MDD to MDR, which was just, you know, you do that own goal, and the FDA just said, okay, well, we'll make it the pathway to come through. So you're basically seeing now people being able to access into the market of FDA. I think you're going to see something interesting as well. When we were at SRS, the FDA was talking on one of the panels. I think what they're going to say is if you can get close enough to looking like an XI, smelling like an XI, we'll give you potentially a 510K rather than a de novo. And I'm still waiting to see whether that becomes true or not. So someone like a 2MI could maybe slide in there as a, you know, an XI clone and get a very fast clearance. But I think FDA is doing that well. It is also nice to see on the IDEs coming through that it's not just the large form factor robots, EndoQuest coming through as well, because, you know, maybe we won't talk about it too much today, but that entire category for me, the endoluminal surgical robotics, I think is fascinating and really exciting as well. So exciting times.
Oh, we will. We'll get into that. Anything else, Joe, before we want to move on?
Yeah,
I want to be.
Go ahead. So just you know, when Steve talks about FDA, Marco, bring up one for me, please. So FDA, and again, we're talking about form factors one, Marco. Yeah, form factors from Asia and Europe. Here's where I think there's a new frontier coming in as well. And this is again, SSI, they're going into FDA in the next 4 to 6 months, and they're doing their de novo trials, and all those cardiac trials are going to be done in the US. So that's gonna get people's attention on the large form factor cardiac trials on their platform. But what's really interesting, Marco, take me to 2, that the number of general surgery procedures that they can do, and take me to 3, Marco, and the specialization on those procedures all on the same platform is going to be an interesting threat in the US on a cardiac robot. Thanks, Marco. On a cardiac robot, what that's going to do to the competitive nature of large format in the US if they get that de novo on the cardiac side of things. And I know quietly that Intuitive is also pursuing the cardiac market under stealth.
Interesting. That's where it all started, right? Initially.
That's right.
Aim for the heart, hit the prostate, so to speak. All right. So we've got going into 2025. So we've covered 2024, and again, we're at 12:35. I want to make sure we get to all of our points, and hopefully have time for questions after. A lot of great questions coming in. Thank you to everyone for your comments and for your questions. It's great to know that there are people out there, because I'm just looking at a webcam. So it's nice to know that we're all in this together. So first bullet point for 2025 about strategics struggling for stronghold in robotics. I'm gonna add the second one as well, the trends in endovascular and soft tissue robotics, because I feel like there's just a lot of movement in this space. So Steve, do you want to sort of take us? You can. This is like a game show. You can choose category 1 or category 2. Bet as much money as you want. But to give us a sense, because the strategics are struggling to hold on. I think we've got some interesting data on that, and we are seeing great moves of new types of surgical robotics. So answer the non-question that I just offered you.
Okay, I'm going to start with the strategics one. I will start with, just because it's number one on the list there, and yeah, I think it's, I talked about this at SRS 2024, and I tried to explain to people I wasn't being mean when I was putting up that Intuitive is going to be there, and Medtronic and J&J are going to be in smaller numbers, and it's not to be mean. It's really because it's so hard to do this. And I just think it's even harder to do it as a strategic, because you've got a million other plates spinning. You've got a million other things you've got to do. It's not your wake up in the morning, think about a robot, go to bed at night, you're thinking about a robot. Not for the top of the company. So I think that brings just a degree of complexity. And you also have to be very fast on robotics. Nothing comes out the gate working, and we've seen that. We've seen it. Hugo, hasn't been the big success immediately they thought it was. And again, they've had to change some things. They've had some things they've had to do with instruments, some things they've had to do with the software underneath. It's easier to do that in a small company. In a strategic, it's just more difficult. And it's not because the people aren't good. It's because you have more process and you have more paperwork and you have more hurdles you've got to go through internally to get that through. And the world is going faster and faster and faster now. And if you're a multidisciplinary company, as a strategic, with all of those internal, let's say for the American market, molasses that you've got to get through every day, that doesn't favor the robotic space. The robotic space it's not favorable for that. So I think they are struggling with that, just by the nature of who they are, what they are, against the nature of what the robotics and now the AI and digital data space is. The two are just not compatible. And I think that's why they struggle a little bit. But pass it to Joe. He's got some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've covered this before, but look, the strategics, it's not their core competency. They've got many other things that they have to tend to. Surgical robotics, you're either all in or you're all out on it. To be singularly focused and have a consequence of life or death is really where these technologies have come out of. If you look at, I was talking to somebody the other day about this. If you're going to create a market or be a fast follower in a market, you can go back and look at some of the best leaders in medtech over the last few years. Gary, right, with Intuitive, Mike Masalam out of Edwards, Mike Minogue out of Abiomed, right? They were singularly focused, and their entire existence counted on a valve, an Impella device, or a robot. And they had no other distraction. And when you take that competitive nature to market and build a culture around that maniacal pursuit of a technology, and then you take an intramural team and put them against that, the intramural kids have all the best thoughts in the world, but you're not going to compete with that highly directed ride or die mentality. And the smartest people are attracted in that category to those companies. So that's where I believe that you've got to go to where laparoscopy gets empowered by robotics rather than going to the large form factor. And here's what's also scary, and we're going to touch on this endoluminal thing. These programs all have endoluminal, the strategics all have additional robotic programs going on in them. I'm really afraid for the careers of the people who are in there, because Medtronic's got an endoluminal robot on the GI system in development. And, EndoQuest is a little ahead of them. There's some other stealth programs going on right now as well by pure robotics thinking people. And so I'm always afraid that what have you done differently in your new robotics program, leadership style, culture, non-distraction, best in the industry? It doesn't transfer as easy. And it really scares me for the people that are building careers. I mean, this is where I always come from these building careers in these super large organizations where it's not the DNA of the organization. I think the strategics are like the US government. They need Elon Musk's SpaceX to take that over, get in partnership with them, and let somebody else put spaceships and satellites out in space, and let the US government do what it does best outside of that. Steve and I have talked about this many times. There needs to be a SpaceX for surgical robotics in the industry that becomes the pathway of these large distribution networks that the large strategics have. But if they continue down there trying to go after these large markets, the outcomes are not going to change.
Steve, you've worked at many of these larger strategics. Is it just a completely different skill set, the development of a surgical robotic system versus the development of something else, a stapling system? And although now I know
it's the leadership, Tom. The engineers are phenomenal. It's the leadership pushes the engineers away from the table, and the marketing people and the career development people take their bellies and put it against the table, and the engineers are brilliant. But after time, when you're told day after week after month that that's not important, do this, that's what happens in those organizations. Sorry, Steve, go at it. I just get passionate.
No, you're actually right. You know, and I'm glad you took it on because I was about to rage on it. So basically, I think the problem is it is this maniacal focus. And are you focused on your career or are you focused on the product coming out? You know, Joe says it well. And again, there are brilliant people in all of these companies, but it's horses for courses. And I don't want to go into it and you know, another thing, because we've done it a lot. But yeah, I think that all the innovation is going to come out of the focus companies. Not necessarily that they're small, but they're going to be focused. And that's a huge difference that I think you'll see there. Let me take the second bullet, which was the future trends in endovascular and soft tissue robotics, because that just, you know, that makes me super excited. So I think that the endovascular, so you've got the neurovascular, the cardiovascular, the endovascular robots that are going inside. For those that, you know, and I'm looking down the list and see there's some people that may not know what these are, but these are long, snaky robots that can go inside things. So you've got two types. You've got ones that are going to go into lumens like the bronchus or into the urological tree or into the bowel. And you've got another set that will go into the vasculature and then go to the brain or to the heart. That's kind of a very basic way that I'll say it. I think the next really big space that we're going to see is in these endovascular, neurovascular robots. I think you're going to see structural heart robots. You're going to see endoluminal surgical robots doing actual surgery like EndoQuest. And I would encourage everybody who's on the call to spend some time to really familiarize themselves with these different. And the reason for that is that the intuitives of the world are going down that path. You know, I released a blog on it maybe a week or so ago about I just convinced that they are going down this path. You know, already got Ion, and maybe Joe can talk a little bit about Ion in a minute. But they've got Ion already for the bronchus. It's not a great leap of faith to see that go into an endovascular or an endoluminal GI robot, which makes sense. And I think then there's a lot of great companies out there. There's a couple of stealth companies out there. You know, InN is one that's in there from the ERCAD place. There's a couple of others. There's Neptune Medical's looking at this kind of stuff. There's all kinds of stealth robots out there. I think it's going to be a big and exciting space in 2025. You'll see more and more coming out.
Yeah, I think Steve's spot on there. Look, the constraints in the catheter-based therapies has been limited by the catheter loses its ability to control within the anatomy, push, pull, because the construct of these. But these over-tube technologies that are now coming into play, that I think it's Neptune has a really interesting one as well, are going to allow a more rigid environment that can be manipulated in order to apply tools and forces where You couldn't do that with the classic technology out of a catheter. So that's one. And I wrote about this earlier in the week. The imaging side of things are going to be a big unlock on the structural heart, because you've got endovascular where you put a stent in, and now you're just kind of deforming anatomy, right, as you expand out a vessel or do something in that vessel. But when you get into structural heart, you're actually altering the anatomy, whether you're taking out a valve, putting one in, closing a PFO, putting in a device that is either going to open, close, or be programmable on a shunt. And when you can take an overtube technology and then now add imaging in on that, which was the issue, because without being able to see something, you can't surgically operate on it. But with the advance of imaging now and this navigation capability and 7 to 8 companies to acquire those, you're going to have the entrepreneurs being driven to that market, which is a different complexity than a 4-arm or a 5-arm robot, different problems to solve. But I think probably nothing's an easy problem, but other solutions in there and a more robust acquisition platform. So that's where I see the other robots going, and the endoluminal side of things and the GI as well as vascular being a big market over the next 2-3 years. Look at Capstan, just calling that one out. Intuitive is a major investor in that. It's in the public domain. And Maggie's over there, who's brilliant. And if you don't think Intuitive, if Maggie does what I think she'll do, if you don't think Intuitive is first in line for that one, you're just not reading the tea leaves.
And Capstan and Intuitive will both be at Device Talks Boston. I just want to put a little plug in there. I had unleashed all the bullet points. We're at just 10 minutes in, so we're kind of go a little bit of lightning round, and maybe if we can, we'll stay over for a few minutes if our guests have the time. But so how can surgical robotics fit into the healthcare system? I thought about this when we read about Intuitive selling 362 systems, and it made me wonder, like, how many hospitals are out there that I didn't even know there were 362 hospitals in the market for a surgical robotic system, and maybe my numbers are way off. I'm curious if you had a sense of what the market is for that. And we have a question from Rosemary. Given that reimbursement is limited, at what point or procedures do you see a diminishing ROI on robots? So is there a ceiling for surgical robotics finding a market into the healthcare system, and is Intuitive, can they basically saturate it and get in there, make it even harder for fast followers or less than fast followers to find a place in those hospitals? Steve, what's your take on the opportunities in the market?
I think for the competing large form factor robots, there's an amount of shelf space, right? There's a number of ORs in the world, and once you've got one robot in every OR, then you kind of fall. But we're a long way from saturation. I mean, we are a long way away. In the US, I think it's 1.7 robots per hospital is the average at the minute. That's a long way away from something like a tower, where you probably got like 10 or 15. So I think we're massively undersaturated. I'm not worried about us running out of steam in the next, before I retire, in the next 10 years. So I think that's gonna continue. But then there's all the other form factors of the robots into a lot of space, like ASCs. There's a lot of ASCs out there, and there's a lot of places that different form factors can get into to deliver care. There's a lot of outpatient departments that still don't have a robot around the world. A lot of clinics, think like Germany, there's a lot of clinics that don't have them. So different form factors can go in there as well. In terms of the amount of money for it, I think the economics are going to start working out. I think that people are going to start understanding, and it still frustrates me today when people say, well, it doesn't, it costs a lot more than a laparoscopic procedure, or, the health economics of this is starting to come out as the data's coming out. And, and Intuitive is doing a phenomenal job, by the way, of starting to show the value in the robot, looking at the whole thing. And then when you start combining that with AI and data and analytics and efficiency and turnover and using operating rooms better, all of this is going to come together in a peak. And it'll take a while for people to understand that if you release capital from somewhere to pay for this, there'll be a net saving of the healthcare system. It will take a little while, but I'm supremely confident that with the data, digital, and analytics that we're going to get, that's going to come to view sooner. On the second side of it, the genie is out of the bottle. We're up the S curve, and it's not going back in, and they'll just have to find the money.
And Joe, I want you to amplify on that. And within that, and Steve, will have you back to answer this as well. I mean, telesurgery, we saw such advancement in that. It seemed that in 2024, what seemed like science fiction is becoming a reality. Procedures are being done. That changes the whole paradigm as well. If you can treat a stroke patient 500 miles from the stroke specialist, it just opens up a whole exciting new world for healthcare. How do you view the opportunities of the market for the healthcare system, and how do you see things progressing in the future?
Well, going back to the question was, robotics, healthcare, economics. First of all, you have to redefine robot from, if you looked in the dictionary 2.5 years ago, it would be, an XI. But, and we're talking about general surgery. So you have to redefine the word robots. And I'm going to keep on pulling this conversation back to robotics coming into laparoscopy. I'm going to pull it back because large format robotics is going to remain the same with the same champion at the top of that hill unless something devastating happens somehow or another on that platform, which I don't forecast happening. So if you look at robotics coming into lap, that's an untapped market. That's a much lower cost robot. That is a much higher caseload that you have to drive efficiencies. What I also like about that, Tom and Steve, is that unleashes the entrepreneurs in healthcare, health tech, and med tech. Because if you bring robotics into lap, you're no longer locked into one environment that owns everything within that sort of package, right? So it helps venture capital. It helps private equity. It helps these organizations like a Distal Motion or a Moon as an example, or virtual incision. You can then continue to elevate visualization, AI. Also, don't sleep on clinical data as a service. Those clinical data as a service organizations are going to have, this is a pick and shovel now of robotics. If you can offer clinical data as a service and build an evidence-based outcome around the entire experience, as Steve said, prep time, breakdown time, room turn, et cetera, and then outcomes, the pick and shovel in the future robotics in AI is going to be clinical data as a service, in my opinion. So, long answer on that one, Tom, but that's where I see the ROI becoming a number on the CFO's desk in a hospital and the payers and providers.
And Steve, going back to you, talking about telesurgery, what do you see? What does the future look like for that?
Yeah, if I just dropped a huge blog on that today, I think it was longer than I thought it was going to be. I think telesurgery is interesting. The use cases of it, you have to understand. So a lot of it's going to be around training and proctoring, rather preceptoring is the correct word for it. That you're going to be able to do distance preceptoring. That's going to be important. China, India, large distances that you're going to try and democratize surgery across. I think it'll be in there. I think in the US, you'll see a little bit of hub and spoke going on where hospitals in their network will try and maximize the robots, maximize the case uses on the robots. And I think telesurgery might be a way for them to look at that as a model. And I think there'll be some stuff in there for the soft tissue surgical robotics about rescue. So, somebody has a bit of a problem and you can bring an expert in, you bring a gynecologist has a problem and you can bring a urologist just to come in. They don't have to physically go to the OR to fix the ureter, happens quite often. And then the final piece is on things beyond that is things like stroke. So two things I'll say. First one is on cardiovascular. You've seen that SSI did telesurgery, bring an expert in where the anastomosis makes the difference. You can now democratize the anastomosis of the best person in the world via telerobotics. And then stroke care, won't go into it too much today, but being able to mean that the patient gets treatment 3 hours earlier is the difference of points on the GDP of a country. So these things are going to be massive when that comes in the near future.
Excellent. All right. And I think Amira beat me to it. Yeah, we talked about distal motion and ASCs. We'll be talking about this tomorrow on Device Talks Tuesdays, we'll have Lionel Flaction from Distal Motion on to talk about Dexter. So moving on, Joe, we talked early on. I want to go to last bullet: challenges in hiring talent for surgical robotics. Obviously, this is your sweet spot of a business. What does the future? I know a lot of people on the call are interested in making this their career. What is the outlook for careers in surgical robotics? What are the challenges for folks looking? What are the challenges for companies hiring?
Yep. Mark, will go to 18 for me. So it's really important for the career development in surgical robotics that the funding environment, especially in the venture area, remains robust. And that funding area is critical because that's where the people get hired. If you look at the funding innovation right now in robotics, you get that seed capital, that really early stage, then you move up into the venture round, and then eventually you need that growth capital, which I think eventually may be some sort of PE model ish, not a classic PE as we see it today, because then after that, it's either acquisition or public markets. And we know the public markets don't necessarily work well for surgical robotic companies that aren't already commercial. And you can look at Intuitive all you want, but 7 years ago, their stock was 1/8 of where it is today after they were the juggernaut. So on the talent side, I still like the less complex robotics. I like the endovascular world because those organizations could have a much lower investment, will have a higher throughput. Those career development for now will take place outside the strategics because the strategics are buying those companies that have that native expertise and that ride or die, and you're working with the smartest people. After strategics get it, what they're doing is they're going to have to figure out how that transition happens so you don't lose that tribal knowledge and you retain some of that team, because when you release a robot, your R&D budget is almost 2x or 3x after it goes to market. As Steve has always taught us, what you think you know in your first 10 robots is nothing compared to what you learn after your 10th robot. And as AI continues to accelerate, and capabilities on board need to accelerate, as well as end effectors and tissue application point of care solutions, all that R&D is going to happen inside the larger organizations, not in the small organizations.
Oh, you're muted, I think, Tom.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had my cough button on. Question from Anand. What kind of skills and experience are most valued in new graduates looking to begin their career in the robotics field? What are companies looking for?
Oh gosh, coming out of one of the big labs, or whether it's Carnegie Mellon, there's a number of them out there. That's always those people. We recruit them 2 years, 3 years before they graduate. We start playing with them and getting them, up to speed, helping them with their LinkedIn profiles, talking to them about where they go. They usually have a pipeline already. So I would say right out, get yourself as close as possible to one of the big programs and/or get an internship. A lot of these startup robotic companies are aggressively bringing on, still at university students as interns, and that's one of the best ways to plan in your junior year or even sophomore year. My son's in a sophomore year program. To get into these ecosystems, because then your network later, even if you don't land a job out of university, out of robotic company, your network has started to become established with the other 10 or 50 robotics engineers that you can count on to be able to network with if you're willing to relocate and really get out there and work your network. Excellent.
It's close to 1 o'clock. I'm going to give both gentlemen a chance at closing comments in a moment. A few thoughts. This has been a fantastic discussion. Thank you for everyone who was part of it. Thanks for the comments. It's been great. Some great ideas there. We are working on someone asked if we can search for past content because they want more on surgical robotics. We're working on that. We hear you. We want you to be able to access all our great Device Talks data. Someone brought up the point about whether there's going to be a report on this. Definitely should be, and we'll see if we can get some of these questions answered in a written format, and we'll let you know through email if you've registered for this. We'll let you know if and when we put something out. That would be a lot of fun to do. And finally, yeah, join us tomorrow for the distal motion conversation. Join us on Thursday. I'm talking to John Norris at HSBC about financing. And of course, join us at Device Talks Boston, April 30th and May 1st. Both Steve and Joe will be there. It's a really small space. If you want to find them and say hello, you'll be able to find them and say hello. So don't miss out on the chance to talk to them in person, because it's twice as much fun as it is on these virtual formats. So, Steve, I'll let you get closing comment number one. Any thoughts as to where we're headed? I have a feeling we'll do this again, but until we meet next time, what can people look forward to?
I think it's going to be another exciting year. I think 2024 was a great year. I think 2025 is a very exciting year. I think we're going to see a lot of the companies getting clearances. We're going to start to see more and more telesurgery, and I think we're going to see NVIDIA's the work they've been doing on the AI side of things start to come to the actual market as well.
Yeah, we definitely had some AI questions in the chat that I'm glad we're hitting. But you could go on. I think we'd have a whole hour talk about what that's going to look like. Joe, we'll give the final word to you.
Look, the privilege is not lost on me to be in conversations like this with yourself and Steve, and the people who sort of give me all my thoughts, insights, and sort of connect the dots for me in the industry. I agree with Steve. 2025, we talked about this almost a year ago, is going to be the golden year of medtech for so many reasons. What I hope for is that we have courageous investors at the venture level. I hope we have courageous investors, corporate investors at the structured deal levels, and get the right governance in place so those structured deals can get over the line without too much intrusion. And I think that we are going to have a breakthrough threshold in 25, 26 with a redefinition of what a healthcare robot looks like, which I think at large will be healthy for the industry.
That's great. And Joe, I know this was closing comments, but we just had a question come in. Very simple, but simple question, probably a complex answer, but the question is advice for senior med device professionals. So those med device professionals who are in the industry, we're seeing all this transition. Anything? It's probably a complicated answer, but
work your network.
What are some things they can pursue?
Yeah, work your network. Open up the consulting door, depending on where you fall within that. A lot of these emerging tech companies might not be able to afford you as a full-time employed consultant, but you have skill sets that they would be willing to pay a quarter of the price for in a consulting gig. And if you daisy chain that to one or two of them, you can stay in the industry and still, churn out some good cash. So that's my real simple answer. But yeah, it's a longer one, Tom. And just don't give up hope. Don't give up hope.
That's the big one right there. All right. Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you both for making this possible and for sharing your insights. And look forward to seeing you both in Boston on April 30th. Thanks for being part of that too.
Thanks, Tom.
And
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And thanks, of course, all of you for being part of opening day of Device Talks Tuesdays. Thanks for helping us set a record for attendance. And we'll reach out. We'll try to get some more surgical robotic related content, particularly to this conversation, out to you in the near future. So keep an eye on your inboxes. Take care, everybody.